landmark article. This is one of his articles that has been fantastically ripped off by an awful lot of people. But he wrote it for my news service, the Raiders News Update, and we published it in 2005. In fact, I even got it published in 2005 by the UFO magazine and several others at the same time. So there's numerous ways to verify when he wrote it. But it was based on mutual research that we were investigating at the time. But he wrote the article. I didn't have anything to do with it, and the brilliance is all his. The article was called An Occult Translation of the Roswell Event Countdown to 2012. I've seen, by the way, that research, even very recently, this year, in so-called brand new books, where authors are out there and they're doing shows and they're making a name for themselves, and they have not given David one piece of credit, and it is almost a word-for-word ripoff of his occult translation of the Roswell Event Countdown to 2012. It was unprecedented at the time. It later formed the basis of his presentation at the 2005 Ancient of Days Conference in Roswell, New Mexico. Oh, and this reminds me, one of the things that we want to be able to do, Brenda, David Flynn's wife, she sent me, I don't know how many, but I think I've got maybe at least a half dozen or more of David Flynn's video presentations that he made over the years at Roswell and other places. I have not been able to get Richard Hoagland to respond to give me the one presentation that David was very proud of that he did with Hoagland, so I probably am not going to get that, and Hoagland may not even have it anymore. But we did get these other ones, and what I'd like to do when we put his book out is just provide that DVD with all of those video presentations for free with the book. So we'll talk about that more later. But the occult translation of the Roswell Event Countdown to 2012 tied a lot of this stuff together. It tied the Mayan together, but also with the UFO and alien abduction phenomenon that we started out talking about, and even with the role of the Vatican. This was a feature article. Even people who have credited David, it's been resourced, Donna tells me, hundreds of times by media, republished in magazines, print publications around the world. But what the extraordinary findings that David made actually foretold, that's the part that remains hidden to most of the world. Because what David did was like Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, you know, our mutual friend.
Yes.
Thomas is still alive, by the way. You know, he's going to be 90 here pretty quick, and he's still, at times, he's still very sharp. But he, Dr. Jacques Vallée, Chuck Missler, others, like them people, Flynn, he became fascinated with a mysterious connection between the Watchers, aliens, the coming of the Antichrist, the Mayan date 2012, and he saw that there was somehow a fiber, there was a string that was running through and connecting all of these occult aspirations, even including Freemasonry and other Illuminatus related to the subject. So if you read David Flynn's feature article, which we're going to include, the original 2005 article is going to be included at the back of the new David Flynn collection. If you read that article, you'll see how that he starts out citing how in 1928 the occult visionary Manly P. Hall had been writing about the Great Seal of the United States, but that careful analysis of the seal that Hall was writing about disclosed that there was this whole mass of occult and Masonic symbols. Hang on, I'm getting interrupted. Talk for a minute.
Well, I think, too, ladies and gentlemen, one of David's gifts was to be able to process an intense amount of data, and then with God's direction and guidance, put it together so all of these discontinuous or seemingly strewn through the annals of history, it would all be tied with a single thread. And I got to tell you something, you can sum the whole thing up in spiritual conflict. That's why, for those of you that are listening to, I recommend above all things, go to DerekPrince.org. DerekPrince.org, and it'll bring you to the site. The most impressive and, in my opinion, most life-changing group of tapes I ever listened to, which started me on my whole quest for the truth, was Spiritual Conflict. I think they call it the Spiritual Conflict Series. So for those of you that really want to get a handle on this, now Tom was talking about the Aztecs, the Incans, and the Mayans. You know, I can't get over the fact that we now have little babies and their aborted fetal tissue being used as flavor enhancers in more than just soft drinks. And you asked me why God would judge America. One of the most interesting points that I have to deal with, or points of contention, is, well, God wouldn't judge America. Look at all the good things we do. And I said, name them. And usually they'll say, well, you send more missionaries. No, we don't. That's not true. And for the record, ladies and gentlemen, it's real simple. God says, if you do right, you'll be blessed. If you do wrong, you'll be cursed. And I've said this 1,000 times over the years I've been on talk radio, that God judges nations, and he judges them in time. He judges individuals as far as their eternal, where they're going in eternity. But there comes a time now when all hell is breaking loose. And as the hell literally breaks loose, people are going to see more and more strange phenomenon. That's why I encourage every single person that is listening to the show to memorize Romans 8, especially Romans 8, 26, 27, 28. And when Tom was talking about some of the giants being 200 feet tall, if you want to Google Colossus of Rhodes, one of the ancient wonders of the world, that was done in a life-size sculpture that stood over the harbor at Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, Rhodes, in the Greek islands. What was fascinating about the Colossus of Rhodes, though, is, again, you're dealing with the word the Titans. And the Titans were basically the elder gods, or in our case of talking, we are talking about the fallen angels that left their first estate. And so when you read about all the children of the Titans, and it's going to be interesting because most people don't understand that almost every single heavenly body or moon of our planets, and at least our solar system, are named after the Titans. Now, why is that? Did somebody just say, oh, let's say we got 12 things we got to name, and there's, 12 Titans, and maybe more than that, 1, 2, 3, more than that. The point I'm trying to make to you and for you is ancient history is before your eyes at all time. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. That which has been will be. And I think it's important for those of you that when you start to understand this, I made a statement earlier in the show that southern Utah has some amazing glyphs. I won't tell you where it's at, but I got a call and an email from somebody, and they shared with me they were a park ranger in a certain area in Utah. They literally have the same exact petroglyphs as they do in the Australian outback in the Ayers Rock, Ayers area. And it's the, I think Stan corrected my pronunciation, Deo did, but it's called the Wajina, Wodjina or something. I used to call them the Wajinga, but it's a Wajina. And the almost identical parallel are in Utah. So tell me this, do you think really the Australians settled the United States before the Chinese? No. What I'm trying to tell you is that the stargates that Tom is talking about, Tiwanaku, the usual place for a stargate is when the ley lines intersect. Every sacred place that's known as a sacred place has a stargate. When you see a spiral, whether it's a Norway spiral, please go Google that story, the Norway spiral, and then ask yourself this. Was a message being sent? Was it Project Bluebeam? Whatever you want to speculate on. But look who was in Norway. I won't tell you who was. You can look it up. And it's interesting that the ancients always equated the spirals with the entrance or exit point of fallen angels. Tom, are you there?
Yeah, and actually isn't in even some of the cave drawings where you see these very strange alien-looking like characters, you repeatedly see that spiral design as having been drawn on the cave walls, and that too is a phenomenon that recurs around the world, right?
Absolutely, and since they didn't have technical drawing and 3D laser printers, that's the best they could do. But the spiral, if you look at that's a very interesting thing because it's called the Coriolis effect. If you look at the galaxy, the spiral galaxy, if you look at the way water drains down a drain, if you look at a chambered nautilus, if you think of everything that's spiraled, even a corkscrew, I mean, all of the seashells, it's a fascinating study, but one of the points that has to be made is that, Tom, it doesn't matter what a person thinks, they can dismiss all this stuff, but there is more evidence to what we're talking about than there is to evolution, which is just nonsense. And now, you know, the goal of the elitists, the luminaries, the Luciferians, was to keep all this secret knowledge hidden, because knowledge is power, and to utilize it to their benefit at the time. And based on what David has done and you have done, I've done, and others have done, we've pretty much pinpointed the return of the fallen ones and the reintroduction. Can I deal with one quick
Sure.
issue? Today I got about 6 of them. Well, what happened to all of the giants? Weren't they all wiped out after Noah's flood? Well, the Bible says there were giants in those days and after the days. And you have made the best case for it. You know, both before the flood, the giants tried to sexually corrupt the human race. They did it, almost succeeded, with the exception of Noah and his immediate family. And then after the flood, and now you have said that obviously that Nimrod began to become a Gibborim. And the thing that's interesting is all the genetic engineering. Listen, all of DARPA's advanced stuff, even beyond what the typical 4-star general knows. I mean, it's alien-based technology, but it's more so than anybody. It is fallen angel technology, because when you go into the Golden Age, if you study, obviously, Atlantis or Hyperborea or Ultima Thule or, Lemuria, any of those, Shangri-La, all of those civilizations passed away. And the interesting point, Tom, is they got to a point where they started to mingle animals and humans, or animals and angels, and God said enough. I just want to ask you, don't you think the Lord's going to say pretty soon, quit messing with my creation? Because, look, we're there. If Jesus stated that except the days be shortened or sped up, that there'd be no flesh left alive, I don't think that people understand the ramifications of that someone's working night and day to destroy everything that God brought forth.
Yeah, well, and in point of fact, when his disciples said, when is the end going to come? When will enough be enough? What will be the sign of thy coming? He said, as it was in the days of Noah. And so when you see that activity happening, know that the end is near. So when you ask the rhetorical question, when is God going to say enough is enough, he already told us when. When we start repeating the same thing that happened during the days of Noah, he's going to say enough is enough. Well, what does that mean then? When you realize that right now around the world in thousands of laboratories, we are creating species that are part human and part animal. And by the way, you and I did a show, let me see, what we got, 30 minutes? You and I did a show, I don't know, a few years ago, and I think it's called The Days of Noah or something like that. And in that show, we talked about how in 2008 or 2009, Reuters had interviewed those scientists out of Britain that were doing human-animal chimera research for the pharmaceutical industry, but how that they had gone to the government of Britain and they wanted to know if they could have taxpayer revenue to further their research. And there was this big hoopla in Britain among the pro-life community that didn't like the idea that a part animal, part human would be created that then would be experimented on as an embryo and then would be destroyed. Well, those scientists were back 24 months ago, and there was another Reuters article, and you'll even recall the article. It was called Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes, and the very first paragraph had to do with creating mice that could speak, dogs with human heads and hands and feet, and British scientists wanting to know if those kind of experiments would be acceptable. And if you read that Reuters article, what they were saying was, first of all, some of their colleagues already were pushing the envelope, already were creating human-animal chimeras that they were raising to full maturity. That's what they were alleging. Well, people at the time, when you and I talked about that, people couldn't believe that that was actually happening, that they were raising these Splice-like creatures. As a matter of fact, it was about the time the movie Splice came out, and you recall that I asked you, because I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, and I said it was the most repulsive thing. I went into detail how, obviously the husband or the scientist has sex with the offspring that they create out of this mass of goo, and at the very end, the baby that they produce, the scientist, the scientist and the woman, or the hybrid woman, produce a thing that all of a sudden grows into a giant with, a fallen angel-like creature, 8, 9 feet tall with wings like an angel. Now, somebody knew a whole lot, and that's that time you and I did that show, Tom.
Yeah, that was right when we did the show. The movie had just came out. I since saw it because somebody sent me the DVD so that I could watch it. It's kind of a gross movie. But, yeah, so it was a very Nephilim offspring type film talking about splice-like creatures.
But sex was really important in that. Sex, you had to have, again, the splice-like, remember the laboratory thing? Had to be then, then he inserted his, semen into her, and then the baby, and obviously the thing at the end kills the father of the progeny of the fallen, or not the fallen, but the genetically created female with the tail.
Well, here's what's important. You and I, now people can go, here's again, Steve, when you and I happen to be on the front side of technology talking about things that people couldn't believe. They're saying, you guys are out of your mind. This isn't really happening. You've watched too many movies, blah, blah, blah. And Reuters sent a journalist this article. In fact, if somebody wants to email me, I'll send them the article. I'll send them the link to the article. It's still cached online. It's called Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes. It was published, I think, in 2009. And that's when you and I did the article. And at the time, I was saying that I felt, and you felt, that what these scientists were asking for was permission to essentially develop islands of Dr. Moreau, where they could raise these things to full maturity for long-term experimental purposes. And you and I both alleged that it already was happening, that in other words, they were asking for permission after the fact, that it already was occurring. And they were alleging the same too. Well, some people thought we were crazy, other people weren't sure. Well, guess what? Fast forward to now, and in just July, the Academy of Medical Sciences in Britain admitted that science had been going on before that article and since that article, and that in fact it's advancing so quickly, they are calling now for an international regulatory commission to oversee the creation, Steve, of fully mature half-humans, half-animals. We're not talking about animals that have a little bit of human genetics. We're talking about 50-50 integration. And if somebody wants to email me, I will send them the report from the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, and this report will wake you up, because they admit that there have been thousands of half-human, half-animals that have been created in biomedical research that have been raised, not killed as embryos, raised and experimented on, and they even go in. Now, keep in mind, the Academy of Medical Sciences is like the FDA here in the United States, right? So this is not some fringe, goofy, crazy group of people that are making wild allegations. They're calling for an international treaty to actually regulate the creation of part human, part animals for experimental purposes, and to create the language around which, when can they be created, for what purpose, what's the goal, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's 3 excerpts from the introduction to their report. Number 1, and this is the creatures that they're saying have been created, are being created, are going to be created. Get this. Number 1, extensive modification of the brain of an animal by implantation of human-derived cells. I'm quoting. Which might result in altered cognitive capacity approaching human consciousness or sentience, human-like behavioral capabilities. Number 2, situations where functional human gametes, we're talking here about eggs and sperm, might develop from precursor cell types in the animal, and where, listen, Steve, where fertilization between human and animal gametes might then occur, the fusing of human and animal reproductive cells. So now we're talking about the creation of a species that can actually procreate with humans. And thirdly, cellular or genetic modification that could result in animals with aspects of human-like appearance, skin type, limb or facial structure, characteristics such as speech, end quote. Those are direct quotes out of the Academy of Medical Sciences published just in July. And what's interesting is they published that report, and the very next day, one day after the Academy of Medical Sciences published their report, the Mail Online published an article that is talking about only 2 of the tens of thousands of laboratories, according to them, that are now involved in this research around the world, in which they admitted that 150 human-animal hybrids had been grown in United Kingdom labs. So that article, back in 2009, Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes, and people can go back and listen to our 2009 speculation about how it was already happening. Well, guess what? We were right. And so are we right now? And that's what people have to ask themselves. Are we right now about what we're speculating about the year 2012, about what David Flynn went to his grave believing? What we've discussed about the manipulation of living tissue by ancient fallen angels that led to superhuman hybridity that was made up of human and animal genetics known as Nephilim, earth-born facsimiles. Is that happening now? Fit extensions? I ask, by the way, we're doing this documentary film on transhumanism, and a current member of President Obama's Council on Bioethics, he is also a member of NASA's astrobiology team, Professor William Hurlbert of Stanford University, has agreed to be part of our film. We're going to be interviewing him in his home here in about a week and a half. And one of the questions that I've asked him is, does a human-animal hybrid, does it have a soul? Now that we know, according to the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, that these splice-like creatures are being grown and raised, are being experimented on, and of course, this year's DARPA's operational budget has millions of dollars in it for editing the DNA of our soldiers on the battlefield. People that are listening to the show may have seen recent news articles where they're talking about bulletproof skin. What they don't know is that is taken directly from the transgenic goat creatures that were created that have spider genetics in them that were originally, it was one of DARPA's first successes in transgenic creation, and now they're special farms that raise these goats that have spider genetics so they can harvest spider silk out of their milk. And that spider silk it's one of the strongest materials on earth. They can make these very, very almost razor thin materials that are bulletproof. Well, what those newest articles talking about bulletproof skin are relating is how that technology is poised now to be applied to American soldiers and other soldiers on the battlefield, where their genetics are going to be altered so that they will literally have bulletproof skin. It's grown out of this transgenic research. Sounds crazy, right? Well, in 2009, it sounded crazy when we were talking about ACHM, animals containing human material, which now has been admitted and now is happening in laboratories around the world. So, Steve, we've entered into a period of time in which Matthew 24:37 is unfolding before the world's eyes. Lord, tell us, what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the aeon, the end of the age? And he said, as it was in the days of Noah. And we're doing it right now. We're doing it in laboratories around the world. And I think it's direct. I kind of lost my